The High Republic Phase 2 has finally begun, and while I enjoyed a lot of parts of this book, it didn't connect with me the same way many of the stories from Phase 1 did. Being set over 100 years before Light of the Jedi, this was a completely new era full of unknown characters, so, like when Phase 1 began, it took me a while to completely understand and care about everything and everyone. The story definitely got stronger as it progressed, and it moved on from introductions and started to flesh out the era a bit more, but Path of Deceit didn't kick off the phase as strong as Light of the Jedi did for me. In terms of the audiobook, the music and sound effects were strong, and being a smaller production with only one narrator, I thought it was decent. The Path of the Open Hand was easily my favorite aspect of this book. I really enjoyed getting to learn more and more about the cult, and I was quickly drawn to the two Everini characters, Marda Rowe and her cousin Yada, who are the ancestors of Marchion Rowe from Phase 1. Despite having the familial bond between the two of them, they were two very different characters who felt very differently about the very similar situation that they had lived in most of their life. Marda was much more idealistic and good-hearted, but still wanted to have a bigger role in the path, whereas Yana could be much more stern and detached when need be, but she wanted nothing more than to get away and live her own life. They were definitely my two favorite characters to come out of this book, and I wish that we could have seen more of them together. Those were always the scenes where I found myself most focused and interested in the book. I've said this in my other book reviews as well, but I've always felt that Justina Ireland's skill as a writer is shown in her ability to create and develop interesting characters that are easy to connect with or imagine in real life, and this book, for the most part, was no different. I did, however, find it a bit far-fetched with how quickly the two characters seem to shift perspectives at the end, when they are chosen to be the champions of the Leveler. Yana wanted nothing more than to leave Dalna and the path, and yet as soon as this event occurs, she seems more than willing to stay and continue to serve the Mother. Marta continuing to stay still felt a part of her character, since she never wanted to leave the path, but just stay with her cousin, but it took me some time to accept Yana's ending as a character. Speaking of the Mother, she was probably the biggest surprise for me coming into this book. Especially after the first few chapters, I didn't expect much from her and assumed that she'd stay in the background for the entire book, but the last couple of chapters completely changed that. She had been holding the orb for much of the story, which, like the characters, I assumed was just a dark side artifact, but the reveal that it was a Leveler egg made so much more sense for both the story and the era as a whole. I loved how its characteristics were gradually revealed, first with the ability to change the Jedi to stone, and then the feature of the creatures, and finally its official name. And it had been hinted at throughout the story with Kor, Yana's girlfriend, being Force-sensitive and having a dislike for the egg, because of the Leveler's impact on Force-sensitive individuals. While I found the action in this book to be a bit underwhelming and lacking, the deaths of both Jedi were built up with enough tension and stakes to make me feel something afterward. For much of the book, I never connected with or cared about many of the characters to care whether they were injured or killed at all. But even though the Jedi were two of such characters, their deaths were written in a way that I actually found myself caring a lot about them. Not only about their deaths, but how it affected the outcome of events. Without being able to warn anyone, the Path were able to escape with the Leveler and have now become a very real threat to the galaxy. The cover for Path of Vengeance was recently uncovered, and it looks like this will follow up on the story, where the Path of the Open Hand heads to the planet mentioned by the Mother, which is home to many more Leveler eggs. If this turns out to be the case, I'm very excited to see the story continue, and to see more of Marta and Yana Rowe. Another small thing that I'm sure will have a larger presence in that upcoming novel is the Gaze Electric, which we learn in this book was originally constructed by the Path of the Open Hand in order to roam the galaxy freely, rather than stay on Dalna. I wouldn't exactly consider it an Easter egg, but including it in the story made sense, and was a nice piece of connective tissue to the era as a whole. Something which I think this book lacked a little. Other than the ship, and the Leveler and the Rowe family, I don't recall much that made it feel like the same era. It is 100 years beforehand, but I think this was part of the reason why my expectations weren't met in certain aspects of the book. It was very well done, but I'd come in expecting it to be something more like Phase 1. The Republic is sparsely mentioned at best, and the Jedi feel different. Even though they are still loose regarding the Jedi Code and much more open to the Force, it didn't feel like we had gotten the golden age of the Jedi yet, at least to me. We only got to see a handful of Jedi, whereas in the Phase 1 novels there were many more, and so that may have been a part of it. But I didn't connect with the two main characters, Zallah Macri and Kevmo, the same way I did with the characters in Light of the Jedi. However, the Master and Apprentice relationship has always been a neat thing to explore in Star Wars stories, and this felt unique in the way the two characters interacted with each other. Their interactions with members of the Path of the Open Hand opened up opportunities for good conversations about the Force as a whole, as well as getting to see more Force artifacts, or at least have them mentioned. Even though I wasn't the biggest fan of this book, if you plan on reading Phase 2 of the High Republic, then this is still necessary. It seems to have a lot of essential information and backstory that will carry into other stories, and it's still a strong start to the second phase that introduced a lot of important concepts. The book is also possible to read as a one-off or a starting point for the High Republic, but you'll likely get more enjoyment and satisfaction if you've read most of Phase 1 already, and have already been introduced to some of the ideas and characters. Path of Deceit succeeds in beginning a new phase of High Republic stories, with a strong set of characters and a layered group of villains, but struggles to keep the reader's interest throughout the various settings and perspectives, earning a rating of 7.5 out of 10. Let me know what you thought of Path of Deceit in the comments below, or if you'll be picking it up after this. Remember to like the video, and subscribe for more in-depth reviews like this, as well as up-to-date news stories, Star Wars lore, gaming videos, and more. As always, thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.